Hi, everybody. I'm Brian. I run a Mason's Work, and with me today is Jedi Master Austin Shifrin. Hi, Austin.
Hi, Brian.
How would you say, I guess, the writing process has informed your sort of Masonic journey to become a better man?
I'm glad you asked that. And the funny thing is that the writing is really more a symptom. It's the research and looking into things and reading and thinking about stuff that's doing more to educate me and enhance that experience. The writing becomes a byproduct.
Fair.
Although what of course, my aspiration and my hope is that by generating that written material, it's also going to spark this journey for somebody else, right? That's the hope here.
Yeah.
Um, but it's been fun that the people who I've been involved with, but particularly the editorial staff of the right now the Scottish Rite magazine for the Valley of Pittsburgh, and PJ Roop, and the other editorial staff have given me a really long leash. And so it's the fact that I've been able to foray into a variety of different subject matter that for me has been enriching and engaging and given me the opportunity to uncover things for myself. I've enjoyed that aspect.
When it comes to the subject matters that you're working with, and we talked about this briefly over I remember when we had this conversation about how the content of Masonic dialogue largely is meta. It's meta commentary about the fraternity. And I think, in my experience anyway, no one joins Freemasonry to talk about Freemasonry all the time, right? They join to become better men, and so it becomes then really challenging to find Masonic publications that focus on the self-improvement aspect of the craft over the kind of historical evals or things like that. I think the distribution's probably 95-5 for percentages for how much of the publication process or publication material out there is more historical and kind of super meta. Um, I'm curious about your take on that and kind of where you think that goes and how does it work?
You're right about something, and you trotted out that word meta. And like the wild thing about it is, I would also uh, take a couple steps backwards to something else that you stated just a moment ago about, well, people join Freemasonry for reason X and not for reason Y. But I mean, the truth is that it seems clear that guys join Freemasonry for a really wide variety of reasons. And I think I would be safe making the assertion also that sometimes fellas don't entirely know what they're getting into when they join until they arrive, or they might have expectations and they might be surprised by realities in comparison to some of those expectations. Um, so when it comes right down to it, I think you're right that in the end result, some of the conversation ends up being organizational or about the trappings of the fraternity instead of about what our goals and intentions ought to be while we are here. And you have that old slogan about Freemasonry takes good men and makes them better, but people will continue repeating that chestnut without flipping the hood of the vehicle open to try to examine what the mechanics are underneath. And if we leave things unexamined like that, I think that we're less likely to achieve those goals or even approach them at all. But I think it's easy to accidentally get swept up in that current, that intellectual current, without realizing it is what's happening to you.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
or you may have more self-awareness than I do, in which case maybe you were less likely to get swept away by that current. But I could certainly have sympathy for a person making that mistake, because I feel like it's happened to me more than once. Even since you've made me more aware of it, I have sometimes also still been lulled by that melody for a minute before I was like, but wait, are you losing sight of the other thing?
Yeah, and so your point about the different reasons that people join is well taken, right? There are tons of reasons why people get involved in Freemasonry. and I think one of the things that we have to come to grips with as an organization, and again, now I'm engaging in the meta conversation, which is part of
Oops,
the
I'm sorry.
horror
I'm
I'm trying
sorry.
to
I did it.
avoid, right? So
I did it. I'm
so
sorry.
so thanks for that. The blame falls squarely on you, of course. You're responsible for all of my actions. When it comes to helping the new guys through this, a lot of people enter the door not knowing what to expect. And if the first conversation they have is about the gilded skeletons of our ancestors, right? I think we immediately set the stage for this. It begins the parade, and to a certain degree, Freemasonry as a concept attracts people already enamored with history to a point, right? Like you don't just walk in the door like, I don't know what this Freemasonry thing's all about. Let's have some. You're like, oh, George Washington, Ben Franklin, whatever in the United States, and you're in different countries. Obviously, your Masons may vary, but you're walking in to essentially make almost an identity statement, right? Like I want to be like these people because these people are people I like, at least in, some sort of ideological concept. Like
In
the
theory, yeah,
idealized
right.
version of this person seems awesome. So I want to be, counted amongst their number. And I think that really creates sort of the beginning of the problem. And then we don't do anything to demystify that really in a meaningful way at all, other than give them probably the most powerful stuff ever, which is the degrees, but then we don't follow up on it. So how would you suggest somebody that has gone down the meta path and has been chasing the ghosts of the ancestors of our craft, how would you suggest that people make that adjustment to a more intentional uh, sort of approach to self-development through the craft?
I think there's a couple of different opportunities that people can leverage, but I think that we also need to be cautious about assuming anything about anyone else either, right? So just because I
They're
feel
people.
like
We could start with people and
you,
work from there if you want. If we want to do the definitions game, we can start with yes, they're adult, they're male, but we can make some assumptions. We have to
oh,
be
oh,
able to
oh,
make some
yeah. I
assumptions.
guess what I meant, where I was going with it is, okay, you have now identified somebody who has joined Freemasonry, and is it safe for me to assume that I understand what he wants out of the experience? So there are a couple of different subject matter areas that you and I wandered into while discussing this in Philly, and we will probably revisit some of those subject matter areas. And I believe, if I remember right, among them was the whole, lead a horse to water, can't make him drink kind of concept. So if somebody has joined Freemasonry and you say, hey, listen, I have some resources and some insights that I'd like to share that are about self-improvement, that man may either be comfortable explicitly saying or not be comfortable explicitly saying if that wasn't even why he joined in the first place. It would be ironic. We might find it surprising. But I think ultimately one of the things that you may be pointing at, and I know that it's a perspective on which I agree, is that we don't need things that are branded with a square and compass to be the nutritive content of Masonic education. Like, it's not made more Masonic just because it says Masonic on the front of it. So if you want to offer people classical philosophers, or you want to even offer people modern philosophers, or if you want to avoid the academic ivory tower entirely and just have a circle of guys who get together and say, okay, in this safe space once a month, I can talk with you about what kind of moral challenges I confronted since the last time you and I sat together. And you can tell me about maybe perspectives that you have on my moral challenges that I might not have thought of. We could even do that, absent any history or academia whatsoever. And we'd still be at least trending in the direction of self-improvement in comparison to people who are comfortable letting themselves sit at the status quo.
We might even call those assemblies a lodge meeting
Oh
if we're
yeah,
if we're so inclined.
that's that's the thing is I think when you've added the layer of an oath and membership and secrecy and said, okay, well, now in this context, what safer place could you sit and open up to the other people together there than this?
Yeah. And I think that's an important point. Like, so and this is as much for anybody that might be watching this as anybody else, but the real Masonic secrets are not any of the things, the modes of recognition, the passwords, the secret handshakes, the silly hats. That's not none of the important part of it. What is important is, in the same way you go to a doctor's office and they take an oath to keep your stuff private, or you go to a lawyer's office and they take an oath to keep, attorney-client privilege. We as Masons will keep our moral quandaries and things of that nature private because folks are coming here to learn and get better, and that may mean they made mistakes, and those mistakes shouldn't tar and feather them for the balance of their lives. And I think if we don't start teaching that like from the jump with new guys, right, that's really what you're here for, like, or that is maybe not what you're here for, that is a opportunity afforded by the lodge, right, that you should leverage to maximize your essentially participation in the group. I think that
And
becomes an important conversation.
I don't know if I can express enough gratitude to you for the conversations that you and I had in Philly. And in some of my travels since then, I have expressed to people sentiments that I would politely say that I borrowed from you since that conversation. And when people have replied to me or given me the feedback, yes, that's exactly what I thought I would be getting when I joined Masonry, you know that you've tapped into something.
Yeah.
People have hopes and expectations, and were those met or were they accidentally subverted? And if they didn't know any way to steer to steer into correction from there, they may have just settled. They may have just accepted, oh, the organization isn't what I thought it might be,
Yeah. The
but it's
dinners
still
are good
pretty cool.
enough,
So
so I'll
now,
keep
now
going.
I'm
Right.
here. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think, and I thank you for the kind words, first and foremost.
Just telling it like it is.
The the way I think that it makes sense then to start looking at some of the content that's out there in a meta capacity is underneath every piece, certainly every piece that I've read of yours. There is a kind of a moral underpinning there of like, this is kind of one of the ways people get stuck, and this is how you might not want to get stuck, even though the content sort of stays conversationally, I guess, stuck, for lack of a better way to say it. I don't certainly don't mean it that way, but it stays rooted. Rooted's better, right? Isn't that better?
Thank you.
So
it's not stuck; it's rooted. Yeah.
it stays rooted in the context of the article. There is almost always a kind of a statement, and one of the things you talked, the articles that stands out is your piece about politics in the lodge, and how the reality is, the moment you have an opinion, you have politics, and you've got to be able to talk to people in a civilized society about those things without breaking out the knives and pitchforks. So I think the truth about that is that there's a lot of the self-development stuff in there. It's just, I think we romanticize the quest to find that information in the stuff that's out there. Like this whole, like, you have to go down this long ass crazy winding path to get to the information. And without that directness, we're now in an age where you just don't have the luxury of time to like, okay, well, go read these 38 chapters of, these 12 books. Good luck.
Okay, right. If I gotta see one more online forum where somebody who is not a member of the fraternity and is curious, asks the general population that they've found in an online forum, who they can only assume with some degree of certainty are themselves genuine members or not, hey, can somebody tell me what this Freemasonry thing is about? And somebody in this forum says, go read Morals and Dogma. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Why would I react that way? Not because I think there's anything wrong with Albert Pike generally or that book specifically, but when you talk, okay, or maybe I don't, okay, hold on.
you're,
But what
uh-huh.
I'm saying is, um, even if you go much more simple and you say to somebody, oh, well, you know what they always recommended to the Masons for this self-improvement is to study the 7 liberal arts. Okay, but what if I just said to that guy, have I said that you need to understand geometry and astronomy to become a better man than you are right now? And if I have said that, or if you got that out of what I was saying, have I engaged in some kind of gatekeeping or set a barrier so high to your perceived ability to become a better man that you relinquish the idea of trying?
Yeah, yeah.
And if so, I have done you a disservice. So, by extension, the only analogy I'm trying to draw there is if somebody who does not have much of a grounding in Freemasonry poses the question, and I tell him, go read Albert Pike, surely that can't be the task they have to surmount in order to get a glimmer of what we're striving to achieve here.
Yeah.
There's got, even if I like using highfalutin words myself, there's got to be a better way to get that man from point A to point B.
Right. And I think we talk about that, the modern concept, and label me woke, but it's called accessibility, right? And if you don't design content for accessibility, if you don't design buildings for accessibility or whatever, you're going to have limited participation. If we only make the way we talk about the craft archaic in our sort of vocabulary and super esoteric in the lessons, such that you have to travel down this long circuitous route to get there, it's really then the height of lunacy to look in the collective mirror and go, why is no one coming? Like,
I mean, it's going to happen, but it is silly, right? Um,
yeah,
is it you, or is it my friend Erastus, who's on this Pittsburgh end of things, who taught me about Stafford Beer and that acronym, the purpose of a system is what it does?
no, that was not me, but
Okay, I
let's
have
go.
to introduce you guys. You would like Erastus very much.
All
Um,
right.
but the author he was quoting to me, I believe, is Stafford Beer, and the acronym POSIWID. The purpose of a system is what it does.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a difference between what we declared the purpose of the system is and what you would derive the purpose of the system is by observing it. And if we
Yeah.
look at Freemasonry in its contemporary state, it gives the vibe, it gives off the appearance that its purpose is making more Masons, which maybe is one of the things it might need to do. But if it is not working its mechanism toward the purpose of making Masons into better people, then the system is might be taking
It's
as its chief target goals that are not what we would have set were it up to us.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that's the paperclip machine, right? That's the big AI degenerative. Like, when you give AI a mission, it's going to turn everything into paperclips, right? Like, if
Let
you
me
give
tell
it
you
the mission,
something. If we could turn the clock back and instead of the AI we have now, we could go back to Clippy, I'd be satisfied.
oh my God, please don't. I wouldn't wish Clippy on anyone. I like you all too much. So the in a different parlance, there's a whole book series designed largely about the conversations about web interface. And I know it seems somewhat uncorrelated, but it's a book series by a guy named Steve Krug. It's called Don't Make Me Think. And basically, it talks about browsing behavior and how folks browse the web and why you have to design for folks that really are just, it speaks a lot to the low cost of of making mistakes on the internet, right? So if you click the wrong thing, you have the back button and then you go click the right thing. And you keep doing that kind of as a 50-50 shot every chance or every time you do it, right?
Cover your eyes and click on the
Yeah,
thing.
because one's as good as the other, and the cost of getting it wrong is near zero. Well, the reality though for us Masons is the cost of getting it wrong is not zero, right? We spend a lot of time making Masons. That is an outrageous amount of labor hours. Not to get operations manager about it, but it's hundreds of labor hours to make Masons. And when they get in the door, if we don't help them find their vibe, right? And we're a vibe friendly channel, just so you know, if we don't help them find their vibe, then they're not going to stick, right?
When
and
you
then,
get done, when we get done with this conversation, if you run this through something and you get a transcript, I want you to check how many times we've both used the word vibe so far, because it's pretty funny. But even a moment ago, you said, hey, look, I want to bring into the conversation this concept from a book that I came across about web design. And you were almost apologetic over the risk that it wouldn't be relevant, except that also comes back to our earlier conversation about the idea of trying to teach anything, quote unquote, Masonic, again, doesn't have to have the square and compass slapped on, right? There are books that I pull out of my library that are explicitly Masonic, and I'll reference something in writing for some purpose and say, here's some Masonic information for you. But in truth, a good 50% of what's of value that can inform my writing and my speaking doesn't have to be quote unquote explicitly Masonic, because by analogy, it's teaching us about something, and that something is intellectually, emotionally, spiritually nutritive, and it doesn't have to be branded as Masonic to be of value to all Masons and the populace at large.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the apologies was really a function of IT speak tends to get some people go cross-eyed, which I totally get. Like web related stuff is one of the perils with any of this, right? Is if we don't recognize as well, like linguistically, that the language we might be attempting to speak is one that someone might find like the equivalent of Orcish language. Like,
yeah.
you don't speak Orcish around here, kids. Like, we're not going to do it.
You're not from around here, are you? Well,
exactly.
So I mean, like one of the pieces of feedback from one of my books that I stuck on the back of the one that I'm trying to put out right now was referencing the fact that in my first book, I was using very accessible language. And like, I took that to heart as a real compliment, because the stuff's got to get across, right? It's one thing for me to want to pat myself on the back for being a smarty pants, but if it means that the language is not connecting with the intended target, then you got problems.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I'm on another podcast with I have a million podcasts, but I have a podcast with a guy, and there's three of us, and there's a guy in the middle whose only job is effectively to translate me to the other guy in the podcast. It's like,
hey, whatever works.
I got one job on this ship.
Oh God. Oh, that is funny.
I think
part of what you were talking about was, you were talking about design and you were talking about accessibility. So we don't want to tinker with some aspects of the experience. We might make reference to things that in the linguistics of Freemasonry we refer to as the landmarks, and we're like, ooh, please do not change these things. But by the same token, within the parameters of what we feel comfortable tweaking, we need to tweak the experience not to pander to people, but such that the message connects, such that the message comes home to people, and so that genuine communication is taking place, rather than running the risk of people sitting on the sidelines smiling and nodding because they know they were supposed to understand what just happened, but being afraid to admit that they don't understand it. Like we've got to continue engaging in our continuous process improvement until we know that genuine communication is happening.
Yeah, you make a really important kind of distinction with that too, in that, um, you know, everybody's coming from wherever they are, right? And you said this, right? You have to meet people where they're at. And sometimes that means really like folks that don't maybe have an academic background aren't their default sort of problem solving modality isn't let me go get a book on that, right? It's like let me see if I can magic pill this some way. Let me find the quick and easy solution. Can I pay to make this go away kind of stuff. And I think a big part of what we end up having to do with each other is sort of illustrate the value of the work we're doing. Again, not as romanticizing the long and circuitous route, but that the work itself, the discovery process you go through and finding your own sort of foibles and things like that becomes the mechanism by which we grow. And so in a lot of ways, we only really have to teach them one thing, which is to pursue that discomfort.
Yes, very interesting point. I Part of what I was thinking of is the fact that sometimes I have to, in my brain, kind of separate my activities as a brother and my activities as a writer. So like as a brother, I need to make sure that I can move around on the sliding scale of communication and get points across in different styles.
Yeah.
In different nuances of language that will connect effectively with different types of people.
Yeah.
As a writer, I sometimes have to be careful of the impulse to want to please everybody. So it's like I might need to just embrace my nerdiness and talk like a nerd and stick with it, as opposed to code switching too much all the time and then losing some kind of core identity, like a voice as a writer, if you will,
Yeah.
right? So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, the writing may always have a bit of an academic smell to it because maybe that's just authentic for me and maybe I can get okay with myself, right?
Yeah.
But by the same token, again, you might be the one who really reminded me of this, that the way that it's written doesn't necessarily have to be the way that it gets presented once I walk into a room, and there may be a different way to get it across verbally and in person than the way it gets captured on the page.
Yeah, and that's one of the gifts of the craft, actually. I think uh, in large moving pieces. Now, we probably all have met brothers that forgot most of what they went through in their process, but as an experience, um, that way of teaching, that experience-driven, like here, I'm giving you these symbols in the context of the problem you're facing right now as a sort of modeled experience is absolutely tremendous in terms of kind of the long term stickiness of that content. I think we don't lean enough on that as a way of teaching outside of the degree conversation. Like, so how can we do stuff like that? It becomes part of folks like you and I are both trying to go out and communicate to folks. There's more here than you think. It's got a ton of value. There's the work has already been the heavy intellectual lifting's already been done. All you need to do is reach here, grab here, kind of thing. Um, that allows us to then start to pursue these other opportunities to communicate and drive and teach and all that stuff. Um, I think it becomes really important for us to reach out for as many of these opportunities to create these diverse, meaningful experiences as part of a sequence of content that we will deliver. Again, speaking to different people in different ways and different audiences.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that we decided to schedule to do this today because I am brainstorming something that never crossed my mind before. Um, but like you were talking about design, and I'm thinking about the things that we get that come with instructions. So the first couple of times I needed to build something that came from IKEA, I was like, these people did a pretty decent job with this little instruction manual. with minimal actual written words, but just with these illustrations, you okay, take these parts that were these sizes, you put them in these places, you connect them to these things. And I can also remember, like, I don't know if it was like the UNICEF boxes where we used to collect change when we were trick-or-treating for Halloween. But when you get something that's like a box or like origami that's got to be changed in shape, it's already, the pieces are already there. You've just got to put it together. And it's like, here's the tab has a letter. Here's the slot has a number, and there's a little arrow.
Tab
And
A, slot B, baby.
if you hand it to me, I can gradually piece together what I was supposed to do. So we know that not everybody learns the same way. Developmental psychology and education about education, like educating educators. And many studies have revealed to us some people need to see something written, or I shouldn't say need, but will absorb the
Gravitate.
information better. Others will do it better by hearing. Others will do it better experientially. And part of the tradition of Masonic secrecy was this whole culture of mouth to ear. It could be that they thought that there was greater peril, hazard, or risk of stuff getting revealed if it was in writing and could be sitting on somebody's desk. Be that as it may, whatever the rationale was, much of Masonic education happens only the one way. But as designers, as architects, if you will, can we reimagine the Masonic curriculum as a combination of different tools that just helps get the point across?
Yeah. They didn't put the temple at Jerusalem's entrance 3 miles underground, in a dark lit tunnel, right? Like that's not the way it works. That's not how any of this is supposed to go. And I think, to your point, the other thing that I think is a really important piece to understand is what may have been historically the equivalent of common knowledge is now gone. Like we don't have that anymore. We don't have the same level of baseline education, let's say in the classical arts or any of that kind of stuff, so that we would be able to draw reasonable symbolic inferences by just looking at a picture of like the alchemist doing the thing. Oh, that means, he's got to like get out his day planner and do, like, nobody's connecting those dots anymore. If there
Yeah.
was those dots ever, if that was ever a thing, it certainly isn't happening anymore.
Yep.
And what do we gain by keeping it cryptic? This information that we're kind of protecting should be in everyone's hands when it comes to like, how do you improve yourself?
It's so funny. Like, what's the value? And I think sometimes the value of some aspects of Masonic language or Masonic culture is more about funny little artifacts than about the meat and potatoes, about the content. And I'll tell you why I say that. Well, I mean, for starters, when you talk about what sort of common knowledge Masonic instruction used to assume out of people, like the idea that people would maybe know like the pantheon of Greek gods and some Shakespeare, like it's not
Since
necessarily
when?
yeah, right, fine. But like it's really funny if you go someplace in a not in a context where you're not expecting any masonry, right? You're at a work conference or you're sitting in a restaurant or in line for a movie and you hear somebody use the word inculcate, like your ears are going to do that thing. And you might turn to your significant other and be like, hang on a second, honey, I got to ask this guy something.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
What? Like, it's funny what the brain does to us. But like, so those become artifacts. It's like, it's an echo. It's a pointer or a symbol of the thing.
Yeah, you're 8 steps removed at this point. And I think the other thing that has happened, maybe historically and probably still happening, is there's a significant amount of using this as a gatekeeping tool and an in-group, out-group kind of thing. If you don't, if you haven't read this obscure text number 12, you can't be part of my favorite thing, or whatever. And we're all human beings. So I understand the nature of where that behavior comes from, because it feels good, right? It feels good to have these things. But I think we have confused in many ways the apparatus and the outcome with efficacy, right? Like I've got the Astrolab on my desk. That means I should be able to navigate very, very easily. Good luck, right?
I'm sorry, you just reminded me of like a meme for some reason. I got too much time online.
You're welcome.
Um, but yeah, there's I think that there's something that you touched on for a moment there that we probably can even circle back to and should never underestimate, because even if you didn't understand why you were joining Freemasonry in the first place, I think many people, I know I can't be speaking only for myself, I think many people have some desire, however much they are or are not aware of this desire in themselves, to feel a little bit more distinct, a little bit more unique. And so when the prospect enters their horizon of joining Freemasonry, there's something about implications of that might excite them, because they're like, ooh, an opportunity to do something even more distinct and even more unique. And I think that some people who have that compulsion, once they join Craft Lodge, they join Blue Lodge, then discover themselves among many, many other people with the same designation, feel driven further by that same compulsion, where they're like, oh, well, maybe I need to attain this other rank because it will make me feel more distinct and more unique, which I thought I was going to feel the experience of when I joined Freemasonry in the first place, and may get driven farther and farther.
Right. But just like communicating in an online forum of any kind, typically you're communicating amongst the specialist subpopulation of whatever it is you're looking at. So
Yep.
I'm in the 3D printing group, and the stuff that's in like the 3D printing Reddit, for example, is you get to a sort of organizational level of common knowledge amongst the group. And that feels like it translates to the sort of general pop, if you will, of society. And the reality is, no, you're still a selected subset. You don't have to climb the ladder of like, now there can be only one kind of thing. This isn't the Highlander, right? So it becomes so really challenging to kind of temper that. And also at the same time, as you climb, make sure that you're not kicking the ladder down behind you, right? And I think that's kind of explains to some degree why we are where we are, and why the writing gets to be the way it is about the craft.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
So, Austin, thank you so much for being on the show today. We'll do this again, I think.
Absolutely my pleasure. I'm so glad that we did this.